Hello and welcome, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good day, depending on where you're zooming in from. Hello and welcome to this talk by Nainoa Thompson of the Polynesian Voyaging Society. This event is an extension of the Barry Lawrence Ruderman Conference on Cartography, which took place last month and focused on Indigenous maps and mapping in a global context. We would like to start today with a land acknowledgement from Stanford University.
Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Nainoa Thompson tribe.
This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people.
Consistent with our values of community and inclusion,
we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible
the university's relationship to Native peoples.
Thank you. And in addition, we would like to add that chief sponsor of this conference, Barry Lawrence Ruderman Antique Maps, operates its shops within the traditional lands of the Kumeyaay people. We are honored, privileged, and it has to be said, very excited to get to hear Nainoa Thompson share his thoughts on Polynesian voyaging, its renaissance, and its future. I'm Katie Parker, one of the co-hosts for this evening. I'm a Pacific historian and the research officer at Barry Lawrence Ruderman Antique Maps. I'm joined by Salim Muhammad, head and curator of the Rumsey Map Center, which is hosting today's event. Salim?
Thank you, Katie. I'm very pleased that we're able to extend the Ruderman Conference, as it were, to include the absolute honor and privilege of hearing from Nainoa Thompson. Meeting him in person, as I could have when I was map and GIS librarian at the University of Hawaii at Manoa for nearly 5 years, is a regret of mine, but today's event will have to do for now. This would not have been possible without the dogged persistence of my chief co-conspirator, Katie, which Barry Ruderman is lucky to have in his employ. Indeed, this conference, good intentions, particularly in spreading the word of the importance of preserving this planet for our children and theirs, and getting to hear that from Nainoa Thompson is an extraordinary privilege for us, for those of us who are fortunate enough to be here. We are indebted to Barry Lawrence Ruderman, who is the chief sponsor of both the October conference and this event. We are quite grateful for his support for this event and also for those in the past. We're joined by two co-sponsors on campus, the Native American Cultural Center and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion of the School of the Earth, Energy, and Environmental Sciences. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our University Librarian, Mike Kenner, and David and Abby Rumsey for their continued support. I also want to thank Julie Singer, Associate University Librarian for Science and Engineering Resources and head of the Banner Earth Sciences Library and Map Collections for her support to the center as well. Last but not least, certainly not the least, I should say, the small but mighty team at the center, thanks to Tyler Mitchell, Laura Kruger, Bryn Kramer. Thanks also to Catherine Vale of One Interpreting, who should be providing a live closed captioning for this event.
So I'd like now to introduce today's speaker, Nainoa Thompson. Nainoa is Puao Navigator and the president of the Polynesian Voyaging Society. A graduate of the Punahou School, Thompson trained under Master Navigator Mau Piolo as part of the recovery of traditional Polynesian navigation techniques in the 1970s. In 1980, Nainoa led his first solo voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti, the first Native Hawaiian navigator to do so in at least 600 years. He has led many voyages since, including the voyage to Aotearoa from 1985 to 7, and legs of the Malama Honua Worldwide Voyage, which circumnavigated the globe from 2014 to 2017. Nainoa is dedicated to education and to the environment. He's a former regent of the University of Hawaii, from which he graduated, and is an ocean elder. He has received numerous awards, including the Native Hawaiian Education Association's Mano Mano Ka'iki Educator of the Year, the Hubbard Medal from the National Geographic Society, and the Explorers Club Medal, Nainoa, thank you for being here, and over to you.
Aloha, aloha mai kako. I'm the one that feels very honored and grateful. And I know there's so many people to thank, but it's a real privilege to have a chance to spend time to share the stories primarily of my teachers. And you know, my disclosure is I don't know. I know this was about mapping and cartography, and I honestly don't know much about it. So that's my disclosure, but maybe I can share today through the world of my teachers a different way of looking at where are you on the world, and even without the kinds of maps that we use to scale down something like the Earth to to a piece of paper. So anyway, I am. Maybe we can just start. I have a lot of slides. I'm going to go through them pretty quick, but this is focused on your work in terms of the David Rumsey Map Center. So I look forward to answering other questions at the end of the presentation. So maybe the first slide, Sarah. Yeah, this is where I'm sitting. It's where I was born and raised. It's I'm Keikio'okaina. I'm from this land, and it's the Hawaiian Islands, and in the middle of the Pacific. And it's a very special place. It's defined as the single most isolated high island archipelago on the planet. If you accept that the oceans isolate us, that's not true. Next slide, please. One of the things that's special about these islands were its first peoples, the indigenous people. Where did they come from? We do know from limitations of our chants, they came from isles in the south, a place called Kahiki Nui, an area around the French Polynesian area. And but we don't know much more. We don't know the name of the canoe that would probably in that time, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 years ago, would make this voyage. It would be arguably the greatest feat of exploration and navigation in humankind in its time. We don't know the name of the navigator or the captain or the canoe. We don't know where it came from because we forgot. And so 200 years ago, there were a lot of influences on all Native people across the planet, and the outcomes are, I think, generally are the same. That 200 years is defined mostly by what was taken away and lost. And so this presentation is not about that directly, but it is about restoring essentially what we find as foundational health in Native Hawaiian population is just dignity and respect and acknowledgement. And otherwise, we are destined to become at the bottom of all the negative statistics in our own homeland. Next slide. Yeah, it was a rough time. From the time that introduced disease would come, the estimates were not good. I mean, the population estimates were 800,000 to 1.2 million at the time of the landing of Captain Cook. And then within the next 27 years, there would be a massive decline. Almost only 1 out of 37 would survive. And so by 100 years ago, there was really only about 22,000 left of Native people, and their land was gone and so forth. It's the same story, but it doesn't necessarily make it right. But part of what we lost was memory. We forgot. And to kind of put that into perspective, I went to good schools. I had the privilege to go to good schools, so-called good schools. But by the time I had 13 years of education behind me, by the time I would graduate from high school, I had no idea who my ancestors were, where they come from, and why I should be proud because they were the greatest navigators on the face of the earth. No idea. And that forgetting, I think, is one of the great dangers of our time. Next slide. Next slide, please.
It seems to be stuck. Just one moment.
Yes, thank you. All of that forgetting would change, and almost in the, at least in my mind, at the status of miracle, and it was driven not by big institutions or government. It was individuals, and it starts with this man. He was a surfer in Southern California. He did his studies in anthropology, and he had questions about the not applying the science to the peopling of the Pacific. His name was Dr. Ben Finney, and he came to the University of Hawaii in 1958. This is the genesis of the rebirth of voyaging. He would come to the University of Hawaii. A woman by the name of Catherine Luamala, who was a professor there, and I don't know the numbers, but you can probably count all the women professors on two hands at that time. And she came up to him and gave him two books. One was Kon-Tiki by Thor Heyerdahl, that suggested that the peopling of the Pacific Islands came from the Americas and driftwood balsa logs. 100-day voyage from South America to an island called Rauia in the Marquesas Islands, and they crashed on that island. But they wrote books and made films and educated the world about who we are. The other book that he was given was by an anthropologist by the name of Andrew Sharp, who wrote a book called Ancient Voyagers in Polynesia. He said, no, they had voyaging canoes. Yes, they could sail, but they did not have the intelligence to be able to navigate more than 100 miles. How do you explain Hawaii landfall if it's 2,400 miles away? So they would explain it by accidental drift voyaging, and that our people got here by accident because they weren't smart enough to navigate. And even that's been tested statistically. It's zero probability that you can get stuck in a storm and blown to Hawaii. So Ben took those two books. Catherine Luamala said, read these two books, they're wrong, and change it. So Ben, and I don't know the full history, that's a long time ago, worked on this. What's the truth about the peopling of the Pacific? And then it would take him a decade to do something very significant. Next slide. He'd call this man. He's an artist, he's a historian, he's a researcher, and he's a world-known painter. And he was born and raised in Waipio on the island of Hawaii. And he moved with his parents to many places in the world. And Ben made a phone call to him because his name is Herb Kubainui Kane, Native Hawaiian, genius, brilliant, visionary. And Ben called him by telephone. It's interesting that Herb was in Chicago, not Hawaii. And it's interesting that Ben never made a phone call to Hawaii. Because if you're gonna call Hawaii about a dream of rebuilding and remembering the great voyagers, nobody would understand what he's talking about, but Herb did. Next slide. And what they did was they remapped. This was not a map that we knew of. This is not a map that we were taught. We didn't know where Aotearoa was. We had no idea there was an island called Rapa Nui, and Tahiti had no significance to us because we weren't taught. But this triangle, which they call the Polynesian Triangle, is 10 million square miles. It's the largest country on the planet. It's three times larger than the continental United States. And if you exclude the landmass of Aotearoa and New Zealand, add up the total square miles of all the islands in this vast triangle, you can fit it into 1/3 the state of New York. But let it be said that further research shows that the first voyaging culture came out of the South China Sea and Taiwan area, went south to what we would call Indonesia, and then it went east all the way, we do know now, all the way to the Americas and as far west as Madagascar on the other side of that map. And the map's too small. That's 15 time zones. And the big question that Herb and Ben had is, how do you account for that? So they continued to research. Next slide. And there wasn't very much solid information because the Polynesians didn't have a written record. They didn't draw maps. And so they were using as the best information they can. Next slide. And you know, I'm not an expert on mapping and cartography, and there may be other sources, but this is the only source I know of a map that was actually put to paper that talked about the location and the geography of Pacific Islands. And it was by this man. He is Tahitian. He's from the island of Raiatea. He's from the place called Opua, where the great Maraia Tapu Tapu Atea there, the great navigation school that many of the navigators would have to be trained. He was a well-known navigator, a respected navigator, and he was a ali'i. He was a chiefly class. He would join Captain Cook on the Endeavour and head south looking for this mythical place called New Zealand. That would ultimately be called New Zealand. And on that voyage, and it's disputed, next slide, his name is Tupaya. And some say that he drew this map on paper. Some say, no, he spoke about all these islands in his memory and someone on the ship drew the map. So I don't know the actual truth. But this would be the only thing that I know in Polynesia where there was putting down islands in the oceans onto a piece of paper that would suggest a map. Initially, the map was considered completely inaccurate because of looking at through the Western lens of latitude and longitude. But there was other scholars that would research this and say, no, it's coming from that cultural lens. Much of this presentation is that disconnection in the cultural lens and how we're trying to put it together. They said that he did what they call roving mapping, and that roving mapping is what my teacher talked about, that in some ways they believe it's not as important to know where you are. It's more important to know where your island is and your destination is. My teacher would say, you take this star path and you don't sail to the island comes to you. And just a piece of the difference of worldview in the world of mapping. Next slide. And many of you may know what this is. It's the Micronesian stick chart. It's primarily located in the Marshall Islands. I don't know much about it other than the shells on that chart. That is the islands. It's the geography of the Marshall Island area, and that those pieces of bamboo that are woven together there and lashed together are really the ocean waves. They navigated. Their primary navigation source to tell direction was the ocean waves. That's not how I was trained. I come from a different school. Next slide. Irregardless, this is an old slide. It's March 8th, 1975. It would be the day, I'm sorry, March 7th, 1975, when this canoe would be launched, the first deep sea voyaging canoe in Hawaii in 600 years. And it would be named Hokulea. Hoku means star, Lea means gladness. It's attributed to the same star that the Greeks called Arcturus, because it was the zenith star of the Hawaiian Islands. It was, you know, I was young. I was just hanging in there. I was just wanting to learn. I wanted to be a part of something special. I wanted to tie the ocean to my life in the ocean to better understanding who I am as a Hawaiian. And it was all wrapped into this very strong gravity that pulled me to this canoe. And I was just very fortunate to be at the right place at the right time. We launched the canoe next day, and it would be this legacy of changing the world, because you're starting to deal with making the world correct and dealing with the issues of justice for Indigenous people. Next slide. I'm going to go pretty quick, so I have a lot of them. Yeah, this man was contacted by Herb. When Herb Kane and others researched where are the navigators in Polynesia, they only came up with one name, Tebake. And he is not even in the triangle. He's in what they call a Polynesian outlier in the islands of Melanesia, but they are Polynesian. He speaks the same language. It's amazing that they're 5,000 miles away, but they would speak the same root language to the Native Hawaiian. He was known as a master navigator. And Herb and Ben and the leadership back then wanted a Polynesian to navigate a voyage from Hawaii to Kaikinui, to Tahiti, first in 600 years. And they wanted it to be Polynesian. It's the only name they came up with. And the story I was told, because I wasn't there, Herb sent a team down to his island in Santa Cruz to talk to him, and Tebake basically listened quietly, and they told him about the project and asked him to navigate the canoe. And Tebake, he's elder, and it's not going to commit to what he doesn't understand, and essentially says, well, we'll see. We'll see. The group went back to Hawaii with no commitment. And about 6 months later, the story I was told, Herb Kane would receive a letter from Tebake's granddaughter that said, my grandfather got up one day and said goodbye to the family, went into the canoe house. He had an old small canoe, took it out to sea, and he never came back. And the sense of burden to family with too much aging, Tebake chose to go to his world, and it's the world of the ocean. He was always seen as not a person of the land, but a person of the ocean. But for me, as one searching to find out who I am, to me, it was two things. One, it was extinction, that they're all gone. The great navigators, there are no more. No matter how much you want to learn, there's nobody to go to. And the other is I was just always just kind of inspired by and trying to take his story to help me define what it is to be an ocean man. And he was the standard and he was the bar. He was fully committed to that world, but he's gone. And so the Polynesian Voyaging Society, and I was not in the leadership role, was wrestling with, who's going to navigate the canoe? We have the canoe, but we don't know how to navigate. And they were considering doing it themselves. That was kind of an exercise in the kinds of times you don't know how much you don't know. And it's very dangerous on the ocean. And then there was another miracle that would take place. Next slide. When they were debating leadership about who's going to navigate this canoe, by miracle, there was a Peace Corps worker in Honolulu. The meeting was in Honolulu, and he was invited to the meeting, and his name is Mike McCoy, who did his Peace Corps work on an island called Satawa in the great school of Wariam, the great navigators. And he told the committee, if you want a navigator, there's one 5 miles down the road. He sleeps on the University of Hawaii research ship called the Thompson Cromwell, and he's a master navigator. And he's of a class because Micronesia was beginning to have other kinds of technologies change voyaging. But what I was told, and I'm not going to start to claim that I know much at all about somebody else's culture that I'd never lived. So I'm very careful not to suggest that I understood was all that was happening. But apparently what they described, that there were 6 masters left, and he was the youngest. This is what I was told. And his name is Piailuk. And everybody called him by the name of Mao, because Mao means to be strong. Mao means to be fierce. And I was told that they went and saw him on the research ship, and and talked about a voyage that would be 6 times longer than any voyage he took, a canoe that's 8 times larger, and the canoe wasn't even constructed. You'll be sailing in waters south of the equator where he's never been. You would lose a North Star. And then you'd be seeing southern stars you've never seen before in your life. And then he'd be sailing with a crew that wasn't selected yet. And I heard they asked him if he would do it. And Mao, in broken English, just essentially said, yes, he committed. And when we think about that, well, some say, well, he was an explorer. He was a courageous man, but in many ways, he saw what was happening in the pathway of extinction. And if he didn't teach, ultimately didn't teach, or if he didn't sail Hokulea on this voyage, he knew the Hawaiian people could not do it themselves. It would be failure. And that in order for it to be preserved, you have to teach. And that was the genius of this and the compassion of this man to help Native people stand up again. Next slide. This is his island. It's Satawal, 1.25 miles long, 1/2 mile wide. We don't know for sure. I don't know for sure. I'm very careful to not represent something I don't understand. But again, what I was told was, even with their chiefs, that navigation was there maybe 2,000 to 4,000 years. And they claim maybe 1,000 navigators were trained here. It's an island that has no lagoon, and the highest soil is 8 feet. The military powers of the Spanish and the Germans and the Japanese and the Americans had no interest in this island because no lagoon, no safe lagoon for military purposes. They left it alone. So the school stayed intact until we needed to learn. This is where Mao was raised and taught by his father and his grandfather and other great navigators in the school of Woriang, the powerful school of navigation, sacred school of navigation. And next slide. And I was kind of there, but I was kind of in the background. And I remember the leadership trying to prepare Mao for this trip. From, if you look at Hawaii is up in the upper left on the top, and then Tahiti's in the center of the map at the bottom. So there's the map, obviously, of the Central Pacific, with depicting the 2 biggest wind systems, the northeast trade winds and the southeast trade winds. They collide in the area of near the equator. Europeans called it the Doldrums. The scientists called it the intercoastal. I mean the ITCZ zone, where these 2 big wind systems collide. There's direct heating every day, lifting warm, moist air and pushing it up. It's like a permanent front. It is the cloudiest and rainiest place on Earth. And you're going to ask Mao to leave from Hawaii. And if you're standing on the beach at Waikiki and imagine over the horizon is an island called Tahiti on the bottom. And if you put draw a line to the eastern side of Tahiti and then another line to the western side, and you go measure that angle, it's less than 1 degree. And then do this on a voyaging canoe and do it with no instruments. Yikes. And he said yes. But what was really interesting about the map, next slide. Yeah, this blue line. So the leadership said they put this blue line on the map based on the general winds direction and so forth, and said, essentially, you just got to follow the line. It doesn't exist, but you got to follow the line. That's what intrigued Mao. It wasn't the map, and it wasn't like it seemed like he was disinterested about the map. I don't really know, when I think back, if Mao could actually see the map, because I don't know if he would allow himself to compress down this massive ocean that he's always seen as from the horizon level into a small piece of paper. I don't know if he could see it, but what he took was the bearings, only the bearings. And then next slide. And they would leave. The map in his mind was that blue line. They would leave, a crew of 17, first voyage in 600 years. This is off the departure out of Honolulu Bay, Maui, May 1st, 1976. There was a complex crew of videographers, those who are going to make films, that had authors that would write books, and then it'd have others, scholars doing research that would write scientific papers. And then you'd have the Hawaiian crew that was essentially, their job was to protect this canoe and make sure it's not taken away like everything else. That was Hawaiian. And there was a real issue, and there was a real issue that everybody that was selected on the crew could be identified that their role meets the mission of the voyage. But the problem was everybody didn't understand who each was because they didn't train enough. And so Mao was very concerned about about everybody not knowing each other. The day they left, May 1st, Honolulu Bay, Maui, I was there on the beach, and he actually brought in a native speaker to speak for him and translate from his language. And he essentially said to this crowd at departure is that today we go to sea. If you have problem, you put it in the dirt, don't put it on the canoe. He was forecasting. He said, today we go to sea, today we make happy. Today we make good brothers. If you have problem, put it in the dirt. Don't put it on the canoe. Today you must commit to taking care of Hokulea, because Hokulea is your mother. It'll take care of you. And listen to me, to my words. And if you do, you find the island you seek. It was all about teamwork. It was all about making sure that everybody understands everybody's function and helps each other succeed. And it was an amazing voyage. Next slide. Yeah, this is the arrival in Papaya Harbor 31 days later. I was there, and there were so many Tahitians there that I had to climb the monkey pod tree in the back to actually see the canoe come in. I flew down to Tahiti, and next slide. The arrival would change the world for Pacific Islanders. Every island group in the Pacific know their genealogy to the great canoes and the captains and the navigators. They know the stories of their ancestors because they retain the language, but nobody had the deep sea voyaging canoe. When this canoe came into Tahiti, 17,000 Tahitians came. That's more than half the population. And I was there kind of just running around. I looked like them, but I can't speak their language, even though that's my language. It's my old language, but I wasn't taught. And there were so many children that were so excited. They jumped in the back of the canoe and they started to actually sink the stern of the canoe. And we had to politely ask them to get off in Hawaiian because we couldn't speak Tahitian. But the bottom line is, this is your family. This is your genealogy. Your ancestors are in this crowd. And it changed the world. That Mao's successful arrival in Tahiti went out through the Pacific Islands, and they began to hear stories of pride of the great navigators, and it started to restore a sense of hope and a sense of dignity and a sense of respect. And there's been so much changes because of this arrival. I mean, at the time that this canoe sailed, it was estimated less than 100 native speakers. The language is going to go extinct in the next generation. But because of this and changes in education primarily, that's why I believe in education, but it's got to evolve and change, is that right now we're at 22,500 native speakers. Yeah, it didn't go extinct because of Mao. Mao was not happy with Hawaii's leadership. He did not want to come back to Hawaii. Next slide. He just didn't want to come back to Hawaii. Yeah, and he was taken into hiding. I never saw him on the land when I was there. I was selected for the trip back from Tahiti to Hawaii, and he was the one that not only did I want to learn from, but he was the one that was going to protect me and keep me safe. He was leadership I trusted, but he just didn't trust Hawaii's leadership because it was so confusing to him. And why didn't respect matter? Why was the value of law that didn't really matter? And so he would be taken secretly to an Air New Zealand jet where he's flown to Fiji, and they worked out a set of ships to get him back to his island of Satawal. He left us, and I'm probably sure nobody in this audience really knows what it is, but he left us an 8-track cassette tape to our crew. And he said, essentially, he said, Hawaii's no good. And Kimo, send my clothes home to me. He had just a bag of clothes in Hawaii, and he stayed with his friend Kimo. And then he said, nobody come look for me because you'll never find me. It was over. And that was crushing for me. I, as one of the youngest crew members, really, really afraid. But as a young man, you don't want to say that you're afraid. So you just kind of pass it on to something else or somebody, blame alibis by blaming others. And one of our great elders heard this about me. He was down there. His name is Wally Freuseth. He's a great waterman from Hawaii down there repairing Hokulea because of damage it had on the way down there to Tahiti. Comes, finds me in the youth hostel we're staying, grabs my shirt and pulls me to his face. He's crying. He goes, hey, boy, don't you ever talk about quitting. He goes, it's your time. You get on this canoe and you take it home. It's your job. And he just shoved me away. And that shoving me away that was the crossroads in my life. If I quit and went home on an airplane, I'd have no idea of knowing who I would be. And so anyway, next slide. We did sail home. We had to bring on professional sailors to keep us safe. We had to bring on instrument navigators to find our way, but we brought the canoe home. Next slide. And the next 2 years were really rough. We were trying to sail the canoe again by ourselves without the teacher. And it's a long, tragic story that we don't have time for, but we almost lost everything. And what it became very clear is that for us to exercise the right to voyage again, we need permission. And that permission needs to come from the teacher. We knew Mao needed to come back, but we remembered on the 8-track cassette tape, don't come look for me. You're not going to find me. Well, I went to Micronesia to find him. I didn't find him. He let me find him. We sat on a white sand beach with a driftwood log, and he was not sure, boy. And I just said, Mao, you know, we need you to come. We don't need you to find Tahiti for us. You need to teach us so we can find our own way. Will you come and teach? And having no idea how complex that question was for him, because the navigation is so powerful that it's so dangerous in the wrong hands. You don't teach it to anybody. You don't let it outside your school, outside your island, and even your family. And yet this somewhat of a stranger from Hawaii comes and asks him some question out of pure ignorance, not knowing how complex and how difficult that was for him. And like Tevaki, he said the same thing. He said, we'll see. I went home, and my elder said, it was actually my father, he don't come, you don't go. And 2 months later, we received a phone call from his son in Saipan saying, Mao's going to be in your house tomorrow. And so that was like, you don't come to my house. I was a commercial fisherman. I lived by myself in a little rental, and my neighbors were really worried that Mao wasn't going to be taken care of. So they started stuffing food in my refrigerator, in my freezer. And he lasted 3 days in my house, and he moved out into my mom and dad's house. And then he would, he would stay with us for 28 months, not go home once. committed to us young people that did not know how to find our way. He promised never to sail in Hokule again, but he did. And it was like an education that is not describable. It was like the master taking the child through the window of time into the old ocean that nobody else could take you there. And next slide. So Ma began the school. He came the first day and he slept. And the next day in the morning, he started school. Next slide. This is the only map that I know that he had. He has an infinite amount of maps, but it's all in his mind. This is the traditional Micronesian star compass. And again, I'm very careful not to misrepresent someone else's culture and traditions. Is much deeper than I understand. But this is factual. In the morning, he went and grabbed stones from the yard. He made a star compass. He wove the ocean waves out of coconut fronds, and he wove a model canoe, and he put it inside the center of the star compass. And then he, when I came down and he saw me, I assumed that I was going to learn navigation the old way by memory alone. When I walked outside and he looked at me and he said, "You go back in the house, you get a piece of paper and a pencil. When you come back out, I'm going to tell you what you need to know. You write it down because you're not like me." He said, "I will tell you once. If you forget, I'll never tell you again." And I have just bookcases full of notebooks. And he also sat down and he said, and this is an interesting point, that what we're trying to find in the next 5 years for ourselves is that he says, "I will show you everything. I will give you everything. The ocean will show you everything. It'll be 20 years before you see. I will teach you what you need to get to Tahiti and to get back home, but I will not teach you the magic." And the magic is light, but it can also be dark. And he shielded me away from that very, very deep side of the navigation. But we began to do this training, and with the brilliance of this man, knowing that I have got to learn from the foundation from which I learned from. That was a basic Western school, and he understood that. And but what he did was allow the freedom of learning. And next slide. And there was challenges, and I'll be brief, taking up too much time. That map you see in the star compass, it's very, very old. It's deeply, deeply rooted in their culture, in their language, and in their genealogy. The schools of Wariang are powerful stories of their ancestors that I do not understand. So when he taught the star compass, I could understand the principles, but I couldn't understand the integration of the stars from their worldview, the way that they saw the heavens. And I found myself in this really terrible place where I was starting to figure out, I'm not going to be able to do this voyage. I can't sail on something I don't understand. And the star compass was central to everything, and I don't understand it. And so it's at this crossroads where if I keep going down this road, learning something I don't understand, when we're going to depart, I'm not going to be ready. Or do I go and ask Mao, can I actually take all of your principles, but alter your stars? And I was afraid to do that because I'm just like the lowest ranked student going to tell the greatest master navigator on the planet that I cannot use what you're teaching me. And it took me weeks to have the courage to go see him. And when I went to talk to him and say, "Mao, can I just use different stars on the compass?" That made sense to me mathematically. And He goes, yeah, okay. It was just like 2 words. It was over. The conversation was over. And then I began to understand the more and more of this man's genius. He knew that I couldn't do navigating by his culture and traditions and language that I didn't know. He knew that I had to evolve and I had to come find a new way. That's the way of the navigator. Find your way out of the storm. And that's your job. The storm was just fear of rejection by him, fear that he'd leave. And he was actually waiting for me to figure out, what am I going to do? And he that's where the teacher doesn't shape the student. He lets them grow themselves. And next slide. So this is just like a diagram of the compass that we had to come up with. It's we call it the Hawaiian navigation compass. And anyway, he allowed that to happen. Next slide. And I'll go quick here because I'm taking up too much time. But I do want to recognize this man. I call him the Star Man. He's from Boston. And he was a geologist, professor at University of Hawaii, but he was a planetarium lecturer at the Bishop Museum. And the planetarium was the only artificial tool we had to be able to go look at the shape of the sky and the shape of the stars anywhere in the world at any time of the year. And I was so confused about the relationship between the moon and the sun that I was getting the moon and the sun mixed up on star houses when rising and setting. And so I couldn't figure it out. So I called the Bishop Museum, and the head planetarium person said, well, I don't have time for you. But he gave me this man's phone number, and I called him at home and around 6 in the morning, woke him up. He had no idea who I was. And but all I said was, Mr. Kaselka, I have a problem. The moon came up in the wrong place. Can you tell me why? So he said, come down to the planetarium, and I did that day. And then within 5 minutes, he had it all figured out mathematically. I understood the relationship of the sun and the moon, and that changed everything about that relationship. But so I was really grateful that he would take the time to do that, to take a stranger and show him how the heavens actually work, and the system of our solar system and planets and moons, but was so extraordinarily important. It was that I came and got what I needed, so I was going to leave, and then he said a few words that would change my life again. When I was walking out the door, he said, hey, you want to come back? And I turned around and didn't expect that this professor would have any interest in a stranger like me. And I said, yeah. So we spent hundreds and hundreds of hours. We used to bribe the security guards and would plate lunches, and we'd give it to them, and then we'd bring our sleeping bags, and they would lock us in the planetarium. We'd stay there all night and just let the stars go over us until we could figure it out about how to find Hawaii, how to find Tahiti. And what happened was this man, Will Kaselka from Boston, became best friends from the great navigator from Satawal, half a world apart. And what they did was, so you're clear that we really meshed. The success of our pathway of learning navigation and mapping came from the integration of these two men: culture, tradition, heritage with science and technology. It was necessary, and they both understood it, and they were best friends. Next slide. Yeah, this is what Will did. There's the other challenge, was that you have all these 7,000 dots of light up there. And one, you got to understand the shape of the sky. Will helped us figure out how to connect different stars. You see that white chart on the left that has the North Star on the top and the Southern Cross on the bottom, and all these lines are connecting to different. So all you do is follow the stars in the heavens, and it's called star lines. So there are 6 major star lines that govern the whole celestial sphere that we were taught from Will and from Mao. And why that was important was we could then understand the shape of the sky and be familiar and there be able to navigate from those star lines that put definition to the region in the heavens. But the more important thing is we could teach it. We could teach it to others. And so it's gone so far as Kamehameha schools, seniors and juniors took the star lines, rewrote the stories of those star lines in Hawaiian. And then got Stellarium to create an app so that if you want to see the stars in the star lines in Hawaiian and hear the genealogy, you can. It's global by high school students. Next slide. It's a map. It's Will's map of the heavens. So I see this as a star map that Will would give to us. And then we would train. We'd train for 28 months. We would get ready to go. Next slide. And then Mao came with us to make sure. This is 1980. The winter and the spring of 1980, we would sail to Tahiti and back. Total of about 5,500 miles. He was there to make sure we didn't make big mistakes, but he was there to continue the teaching and never went home once. And next slide. Yeah, he showed us the way in the training of and this will be very, very brief, taking us by the hand like children, showing us the way on the oceans. Nobody else could do it. Nobody could do it in the whole planet. And that's the level of the miracle and how grateful we are to him. Next slide. Navigation is an act of observing nature. It's not just observing. And I'll speak to it. It's about becoming nature, and it's a very, very deep relationship. When we first were starting to sail, we didn't have any idea. What do you look at? Or where do you stand? How do you sleep? What do you think? How do you even look? And we didn't know any of that. And so all we did was watch Mao. And Mao was very non-verbal on the ocean. Take a typical day with Mao at sea on a long voyage. And in that day, he'll make 5,000 observations of nature. And then in that 24-hour period, he'll make 500 choices about trim, about steering, about weight and balance, and about all the things it needs to balance the operation of that canoe in nature at that moment. And then he'd make only 2 decisions, one at sunrise and one at sunset. The powerful time to watch nature is going to forecast the weather for you. And that where are you and where are you going? And we would watch him, because you can only tell where you are by memorizing where you come from. That means you don't have the privilege to sleep. So we saw the standard in the bar of this man up 21, 22 hours a day, only sleeping in cat naps. And that's what we had to become. And but we learned from watching him. Next slide. But the navigation is pretty basic. Sunrises, we know the bearing of the sun, so we adjust the steering of the canoe to the destination we're trying to go. Next slide. Sun gets too high, you don't know where it came up from. Then you have to move your eyes from the sun to something else. Next slide. If you have the moon available in the daytime, it's a really good friend to you. Same thing like the sun. Even that cut in the moon right now is telling me I know where south is. I'm just that flat edge. It's pointing, if you're in Hawaii, it's pointing to south. Next slide. But the main thing is you study the waves. Everything's based on a star compass, but on average, you're only going to see the stars 20% of the time on an average voyage. Half of it's in daylight during day, if you exclude the sun as a star. And then you have twilight, and then you have clouds. And so, like Ma always said, if you can read the wave, you'll never be lost. So sunrise, you see the light coming across the ocean. You start to memorize the shape of the sea. It's hard. And the complexity of the different kinds of waves. Next slide. But everything is in the wave. Everything's in the wave. You're never lost if you can read the wave. And so it's hard. And that's what we train the most for, is learning how to do that. Next slide. But on a typical day, then the sun goes down. You use it like a sunrise. You know the bearing. You set course off of that bearing on the star compass. You're constantly placing nature onto what they call star houses, 32 of them on that star compass. You're constantly placing nature into the star compass as a memory tool. Next slide. Clear nights. I mean, I should get a much better slide than this, but we use about 220 stars, both where they rise and where they set. And then certain patterns that tell us where north and south is, the meridian. And we know them by name, and many stars we use without names. Next slide. And when you sail from Tahiti to Hawaii, do know that just slide. I don't know if I can articulate it, but if you look at the S, the south, go up the green line, you're going to see the Southern Cross. This is the Southern Cross in French Polynesia. It's 38 degrees generally, at least the bottom star is, called a crux. We call it Kamole Honua. It's the taproot of the earth. And it's Southern Cross is upright when it's south. So we see the Southern Cross upright. We know it's upright. But more importantly, we're looking at the height of those stars above the horizon. Now, imagine you're leaving Tahiti. You're going to go to Hawaii. You're going to sail over the curve of the earth to the north. So you're going to be sailing underneath northern stars, and you're going to be leaving behind southern stars. Next slide. Look at the pattern of the Southern Cross. In Hawaii, it looks like this. It's the same Southern Cross, but the distance from the top star to the bottom star, Kaulia on the top and Kamole Honua on the bottom, is 6 degrees. The same distance at the bottom star is to the water. So we keep going north and we keep moving the Southern Cross down as it transits the meridian every night. And then when the top star to the bottom star, that distance is equal to the bottom star to the water, you're in the latitude of Hawaii. We sail east, upwind, and we just turn west and keep going west until we bump into something. This is the map that we use. We don't have it on the canoe. You have it in your mind. When you train for voyages, students must go to destinations like this. We go to South Point on the Big Island, we go to the northern southern part, we go to the northern place on Kauai, and we look at the difference. The map of the stars is imprinted into your memory by going and studying from at your destination. So it's a form. It was the mapping that we were taught by Mao and by Will, and we do many of these star lines, but that's just one of them. Next. Yeah, and then landfall. This is Tahiti, and the island is very dark from the sea because there's so much rainfall. These are high islands, high volcanic islands. You can see them very far away in good weather. Next slide. But the majority of stars islands that you're going to be going through are atolls, and there are the Tuamotu Archipelago, the second largest archipelago of islands in the world, and the vast majority is all atolls. They're dangerous at night because they're mostly, this is a wooded part of an atoll, but the most of it is unwooded, and they're just reefs. And sometimes we made mistakes down there and we'd hear the surf before we saw it. It's very dangerous. And so you need to do what's called expanded landfall. And Mao taught us all of this. Next, I'll go quick. Coming close to land, the algae and the seaweeds and the limu change. You start to see the next. Animals change. Dolphins become small because they use the islands as a place for them to grow up. You start catching barracuda when you never catch them in the deep sea. Next slide. It's the seabirds though. This is these are sheer waters, and they are great flyers, and some of them are terns, but these birds, they sleep on the water. So you're looking for the bird that lives on the land that goes out early in the morning, fishes, and goes back. So they're going to be close to the island always. Not these birds. They're going to be 1,000 miles from land. They're called pelagic, and they sleep on the water. Next slide. This bird is the Eva bird. Eva means thief. It has a very long wingspan. It's the second largest bird in Polynesia, next to the albatross from New Zealand. Its wingspan is so long, if it lands in the water, it'll drown. If it doesn't have waterproof, nature never gave it waterproof feathers. So what it does is when the small birds catch a fish, this bird will push the birds up in the sky and harass it until they drop the food, and then they'll catch it in the air. They're called the thief. These birds, once they learn how to fly and they're juveniles, will stay out at sea up to 3 to 4 years. They tell you nothing. They're just like really awesome to see, but they don't tell you anything. Next slide. But it's this one, tiny little white tern. Tahitians call it itai. We call it manuoku. This bird sleeps on the island and go out 120 miles, fish, and come back. So we sail down to seeing where the stars are to tell us the atolls are close. And then when we see this bird, the navigation system changes. You see the bird, it fishes, it flies like a butterfly, picks off small bait off the ocean. And then when the sun gets low enough for the bird to know where the island is, the higher the sun is, when it goes back to the island, the farther the island is away. So when the bird stops flying like a butterfly and flies straight like an arrow, they fly straight to the island. So now they are navigating you to where the island is. You put the flight of the path of the bird on the star compass, and that's your bearing. And then you go climb the mast at sunset. And if there's no island, you put the rig down so you don't run over it at night, and you wait for sunrise. And so the flight path of the bird is coming from the island. It's pretty amazing. Next. And then the other whole piece of training is storm sailing. This is what we're putting a lot of our young people into now. Next slide. Remember, you only know where you are by memorizing you come from. You cannot sail in a direction you don't know where you're going, because you cannot account for that into the memory on the star compass. So this person that's there is sitting up, but he's sleeping. If you look at the toes of the individual that's at the bottom of the slide, you can see that the skin is beginning to shrivel like a prune. That's because there's so much water. The deck is really wet. This navigator cannot lie down because he can sleep too long. And so they sleep sitting up just to clear the mind to get back up. Because at one point, if you do not know where you're going, you're forced by the rules of navigation to put the rig down and wait for a celestial clue. It may take days. And so it's just not easy, that's all. Next. Yeah, then we sailed to Tahiti, went down there, came all the way back. It was captained, it was crewed, it was navigated by those from Hawaii. And the great navigator was there to help us with the big mistakes. And it was an extraordinary trip. This is 1980. And then next slide. Yeah, this whole road. Next slide. Yeah, actually, you can use it to come back to Hawaii. So when we sailed, we went all the way down and came back. Next slide. And Mao would be packing his bag. One small, we would consider carry-on that he had for 28 months. And would be going home for the first time. Next slide. It's important in terms of the importance of mapping, I think, in the mind of children. Because Mao, while he was packing his bag, he called me into his room. He said he wanted to talk to me, and he sat me down. He's going home. We just finished the trip. We all felt it was successful because the canoe was cared for and nobody got hurt. And we found the destination we're looking for. He's going home for the first time. He sits me down. He goes, "Okay, Nainoa, on the voyage, you did okay. And then he said, I give you everything, and the ocean showed you everything, but it'll be 20 years before you see. And then he said, if you want someone to know everything in the navigation, you send your son because you're too old. And then he talked about his grandfather, who he loved dearly as his teacher, because Mao's father died when he was very young. And his grandfather his grandfather would put him in tide pools on the island of Satawal, where Mao could play. But in the playing, he could hear the seabird, he could smell forest, he could taste salt, he could feel the feel of sand, and he could hear the ocean wave. At age 5, the training in the school of the navigator, at age 5, Mao was on the deep sea voyaging canoe with his grandfather. And Mao, I remember distinctly in the room, he goes, when the wave come to the canoe, the wave lift the canoe up and go down with the wave, the canoe go up and down, and the canoe make me sick. And Mao would say, my grandfather would tie my hands with a rope, throw me overboard, and drag me behind the canoe. And Mao never talked about child abuse or anything. He talked with great love about his grandfather. And he said, my grandfather, tie my hands, throw me in the ocean so I can go inside the ocean. When I go inside the ocean, I can go inside the wave. When I go inside the wave, I become the wave. And when I become the wave, I become navigator. And what Mao said, you have to learn that when you're young. And I agree. We will fail the next generations if we don't teach the connection of humanity to nature. How can you ask the next generation to protect something they don't understand? And if you don't inspire them to love the earth, why would you expect them to care for it? And all the fracturing on this planet, we need to find ways to unify. Because the solutions are not going to be by ourselves. It's going to be all of us. Got to come together. And Mao had, being with him, solidified my belief in the importance in education, change, and evolution. And when do children learn values? When do children become connected to nature? When? From his point of view, from his grandfather, it was when you're young. And so, next slide. One story about mapping. This is the men's house on the island of Satawal. This is where they keep the canoes. And I was there, not this particular trip, but I was there with Mao. And they took everything out of the canoe house and they put one chair in one corner, one chair in the other corner of the men's house. And they put Mao in one chair, and he was very elderly and he wasn't well. The impact of diabetes was very clear on him. And on the other chair, they put his brother. And I was there just as a witness to watch this, and nobody else in the men's house. And they start teasing each other and badgering each other about the navigational knowledge. But they start talking about the parrotfish swim to this particular reef. They put the stick in, then it goes to this other reef. And they put the stick in, it goes to a submerged reef. They put the stick in, and then it goes to islands that didn't physically even exist on the planet, and they knew it. But they were important islands to a system called ATAC that I don't understand, and I don't want to pay disrespect. I'm just telling you what little I know. But what I watched for hour after hour after hour was this test of memory. And they were teasing each other. And Mao would say that his brother's better than him. And you know what's so amazing about his brother? His brother was blind. He couldn't see the stars. He only navigated by the wave. And Mao had great reverence for his brother. But they laughed and they laughed and they laughed. And they were not well, but they just stayed there for hours on end. And what it was it's the mind mapping. That the geography, there are maps of geography. It's not on paper. It's in their memory. It's in the memories of their ancestors. from centuries of voyaging these oceans. And that ability to remember and store it, where I store everything now, it's like on a laptop or it's in a filing cabinet. You can store it away because you can go forget, but you know where it is. No, that's not the world of the navigator. So they do mapping. They do know the geography. They do know the star lines. They do know the mapping of the stars, but it's all in their head. And I just found that fascinating. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. You know, we sailed a lot, about 280,000 miles in the last 46 years. Actually, next slide. We actually went around the earth, and we took all of our teachers with us because we needed to. We took their values, their instruction, their commitment, and their duty to keep everybody safe, and to, you know, we can't protect what we don't understand, so we need to learn the earth. And we wanted to find out is humanity still kind enough to care, to change? And we needed to find people that were doing things for the goodness of the earth and for humanity. And what we found was strangers everywhere, every place, that strangers doing acts of kindness to, whether it's in a classroom or in a rainforest on a coral reef, whether it's in the worst of our slums, people that were doing whatever they could in the halls of universities, in their living rooms with their families. And what we found was these strangers, thousands of them, people we didn't know, that were doing something that's good for the earth and humanity. And in doing so, we started to recognize that they're not doing it for themselves. Every time there's an act of kindness, it's for all of us. It's the race between those who are damaging the earth and those who are going to protect it and restore it. And it was the most uplifting understanding that I believe that we are living within the greatest time in humanity of this whole kind of instinctual, maybe unsaid truth, that we are willing to protect our home. And the home is the island Earth, the only one we have in the universe that we can search very far. And next slide. So we train. Hokulea will be, in 4 years, will be 50 years old. And it's time for us senior guys to get out of the way. We have great teachers that we take with in oceans, and we have to help these young people find theirs. So we train. And I know I was asked to talk a little bit about training. So our focus really is the seniors become teachers, and we invest into the young ones. I do not believe the voyaging will sustain itself if you're going to go deep sea, unless there's a conscious, successful effort to train a young pool of people every 10 years. If you fail to do that at some point in time, we're not going to know what the navigation, and we're not going to know how to sail a canoe properly, and we can't teach it. There's no more miles. Next slide. This is a cool slide. We teach our young ones the values of care. We tell them when they do night swims of 1,200 feet in the dark so they can handle the trauma of falling overboard at night in the rough, and swim in together. We tell them, if you want to get cut from this program, leave your friend behind. You stay together, and no competition, no racing. You take care of each other. We also tell them on this sail we took, it's their group test. These are 5 young navigators in this past July that navigated Hokulea up 500 miles up to Papahanau Mokuake, the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And the islands that they had to find is a number of them. One is Nihoa. And the reason why these 5 are smiling so much, if you look to the girl on the, I guess the right, that's lowest, and look right above her head on the horizon. it looks like a cloud, but it's not. That's an island. And that tiny little island, they pulled it out of the sea because they took care of each other. They took care of each other. And so we train primarily into teams of caring. Teams of caring. Next slide. Even tonight, we were going to go sail, but we trained them to take a test. The test is 36 to 48 hours by yourself on Oholea. And it's immersion. And what we want to find out, do you know the canoe enough? Can you do all the jobs? Can you do all the work to sail it by yourself? And can you navigate by yourself together? Take care of the canoe, sail it, navigate. And for 36 or 48 hours, it's the individual test, because we believe young people must be challenged. They must be given the bar, the standards of expectations, because we believe that they can do extraordinary things. Keep the bar too low, young people won't come. You keep the bar too low, they won't be able to navigate in time. So we're doing pretty extreme training right now. So they're just going to have to sail on their own. But our conversation with them, you are never alone on the canoe. There may not be anybody standing on the deck with you, but your ancestors are there. The bird is there, the wave is there, the sun is there, the moon is there, and your star compass is there. And all of your teachers, everything you know that was taught is there. It's in you, and call upon it. And so they are really, really kind of freaked out and nervous, but I don't tell them, but when they're successful at this 36, 48-hour voyage, to go inside themselves and find who they are, they're going to come back different, stronger, more humble, more quiet, more caring. And that's the kind of leadership we need in young people to take on the storms of the earth that's coming every day at us. Next slide. Yeah, and I'm just summing this up. I know it's just trying to do a fraction of what Mao did for us, and just connect young people to the magnificent, infinitely complex beauty of this earth, an infinitely complex system of life. And we do this through the canoe on the oceans, because this is an ocean planet. 70% of the surface is water, and the Pacific owns more than half that salt water. And I would like to end this presentation with giving you some idea about where we're going in a short video. So, I thank you for just listening to me. It's important. I appreciate it. But I'm going to end this with a video, and I'm looking forward to, because I went through so fast, to answering any of your questions as long as you want to ask them. Thank you. Mahalo.
I know Tyler is giving it up.
These miracles of these voyagers that started to discover all these islands, it's like the eighth wonder of the world. How did they do that so far back in time? There was two things of genius in Polynesia. Someone needed to build a vehicle, a spaceship of our ancestors that could sail far, when no other culture on the earth was sailing far. The other is you had to navigate to find a way to and from. The navigator needed to be able to see, needed to be able to hear, it needed to be able to feel. Every day that navigator would maybe making 5,000 observations of a wave or a bird or a star. It would make 500 choices about trim, course, steering, and then it would make 2 decisions. At sunrise and sunset, in the color of light of dawn and dusk, it would make decisions about where are you on the earth. I think we are where we are on the planet today, where human beings are changing the earth. It is now turning around and changing us, and we don't know what to do because we disconnected. The greatest thing we need to do is become family of the earth again, family of nature. The greatest naturalist I ever met was my teacher, Papaya, who transcends the observation of nature to what he calls the magic. It is about when the human existence becomes part of the family of nature, that you are nature. The thing about Mao, the day he was leaving, packing his bag, he sat me down and said, okay, Nainoa, I give you everything. And the ocean showed you everything, but it'll be 28 years before you'll see. If you want someone to know everything, send your son, because you're too old. That's a crucial piece of cracking the code. And it's when we teach our children. When do you learn the connection? When do we learn verbal language? When do we learn the language of nature? And that's the language we need to immerse ourselves. We need to bring it back. We need schools of nature immersion globally. And that's why we're voyaging. To just getting general awareness to half the population of the earth, getting understanding to a quarter population of the earth, and getting the sense of values back to 1 billion people. And then going down the road from values, you need to reinstate respect. Then you need to reinstate care. And then from there, where values are now moving to action, that's when you need to help strengthen a community and a culture that's global, not based on race, but based on values. Hokulea takes us into the wild. The voyage itself will take about 400 crew members from, we're hoping, about 26 countries. Diversity and equity and access matters. That this is not just a Hawaiian voyage, this is a global voyage. We'll be at sea for about 450 days, and we'll be on land for 950 days. Every day is a story of ideas and people. You cannot make this movement by yourself. You have to have communications and education platforms that can get it to the billions. And then you need to have partners that are going to essentially strengthen the stories, help us to access communities. We will probably go to maybe 220 indigenous territories to make sure that these people have voice. Hokulea, Hikanalia will do its part. It won't do it by itself. You need the platforms and you need the partners. And that whole voyage of connecting to the earth and connecting to these people who can make change, we're working just as hard on those partners and those platforms as we are in getting Hokulea ready to go. When you try to imagine and add up how much goodness people are actually doing as individuals, not collected, not organized, not institutionalized. We should never do that. Just let that wave happen, let that movement happen. We're in the race between those who are essentially hurting the earth and those who are healing it. To me, it's not about hope anymore. We don't have time for hope. We need to begin getting started in believing that we can make that change.
Okay, thank you so much, Nainoa. That was absolutely amazing. All of the accolades and thanks have been absolutely pouring in. And we know that it is a hugely emotional and important subject for you. But I'd like to tell you, you've elicited a lot of emotion in the people who are also listening today. And the chat is just full of people thanking you and saying how special this story is, how important it is to them. And we actually have quite a few Pacific Islanders in the audience today who are saying how important it is for them to be hearing this story. So I wanted to thank you for sharing your story, and then sharing how your deep, deep respect for your teachers, and also your deep, deep respect for the other knowledges that you've come in contact to but aren't an expert on, and the way in which you approached all of those very important cultural artifacts was very moving. If you can, we are technically at time for people that are here, but if Nainoa is okay with it, we're going to ask a few questions, so people are welcome to stay. We understand if some people need to go. It is definitely the middle of the day for some people, or I know for some of us it's very late in the evening at this point. So we do have a few questions, and just a lot of people again expressing thanks, and I'll send some of those to you. I know some of the ones that people have been sending, but people have a lot of questions about the canoe, and about how you prepare it. I know there's 5 miles of lashing on the canoe that need to be replaced every time you prepare for another big voyage. So a few people would like to know how you prepare the canoe itself for something like the Circum-Pacific voyage.
Yeah. The way we prepare it is through one name. It's called Bruce Blankenfeld. He's a pole navigator, and he's top captain, and he's been caring for these canoes for 20 years. And what Bruce does, the way we care for the canoe is you watch Bruce, because everybody will watch Bruce day in, day out, just put so much care and so much love into these canoes, because our lives depend on it. And that act of caring and the commitment for the long term, no matter what, he'll be there. So whenever Bruce calls someone, they come because they want to support him. The job is so big. To relash these canoes is just a mammoth job. It takes many, many hands. But when Bruce calls someone, they always come. And that level of leadership is really based on community watching. How much does he care for this canoe? How much does he care for safety? How much does he care for the people that will sail it? And that's how I see the canoes getting ready. If you didn't have that kind of levels of values-driven leadership, I don't think the people are going to come. If they don't come, you can't repair the canoe because it's too big. The job is too huge. It's hundreds of people coming together around an idea and around a leader. I just want to invoke his name. His name is Bruce Blankfeld, top captain, top navigator. So there's thousands of things that need to be done. But what Bruce does, he makes everyone know that they're valued. And he makes everyone know that they're part of something extraordinarily special. And he makes everyone know that whatever they give to the canoe, they're giving it to everyone. And that's how you build the voyaging community. It's around those values.
Thank you. People are very interested in life on deck once you guys are out in the water. They are interested in how, and I think this is just because we all maybe stay up too late, how might you actually stay awake? You mentioned this a bit during your talk, but the sleep sitting up. But is there any other ways in which people make sure they stay awake, since it is so important for safety?
Yeah, I mean, when I was training with Mom, we didn't know anything, but when we finally figured out, like, oh, you want to be a navigator? Okay, don't sleep for a month. And so I was so terrified about that, because I watched him, and he's so amazing that in the training sails we did, like outside of Waikiki, I remember I got a lot of scoldings from him, but this is a pretty severe one. He said, okay, you follow the star path roller, then I'm going to go sleep And so he goes inside the hull of the canoe, lies down on his back, and he puts his hand on his chest. And so I go inside, look, his eyes are closed. I'm assuming he's sleeping. So I was getting bored by sailing on that one star line. So I wanted to change it. I changed the course. And then I changed, and I go, look, he's still sleeping. So I figured out he doesn't know. So I kept changing it. And then at sunrise, I put the canoe back on roller, and we're sailing the course. And he gets up, he goes, hey, what star line you sailed last night? And I looked at the redness in his eyes. I was going, oh man, I am going to get, this is really a bad day. And I couldn't answer him. I was like paralyzed. And he goes, what star line did I tell you to? I said, what star line did I tell you to sail last night? And then I said, roller. And then he said, well, where did you sail? And I was like paralyzed. And so he finally goes, you know, I see you come look at me. You think I'm sleeping. You think I'm sleeping. My eyes are closed, but over here it doesn't sleep. That is the realm of the magic that I don't understand. Mm-hmm. I don't understand. He knew where we went. Inside the hull, lying down, eyes closed. So when I answer your question is, let you know, I don't know how to do that. That's why when someone says you're master, no, I'm not. I'm a student who knew a master. And that chasing that magic is just, it's one of the great pleasures of my life. I don't want to be a master. I want to be the student. So my way in sleeping was, when we were training, I would figure, okay, just train not to go to sleep. So Ma would be in the bedroom of my parents' house. I'd be with him, and I'd get like a blanket at night. I'd just keep walking around the house, because I figured if I keep walking, then I'm not going to go to sleep, because you can't sleep if you're walking. So I just kept walking, and I would do it like for a day, and then I don't know what happens, but you go into collapse and you're out cold for another day. And Ma would he didn't train me or anything. He just kind of laughed at me like, you are really stupid. And so I just didn't believe that I could be like Ma when we went to Tahiti, and I accepted I can't be him. He's the magic and I'm not. When we left Hilo Harbor, let me just say this. My first voyage in 1980, I was so afraid that I was going to fail and make shame. It's part of being Hawaiian. You were taught that when you're young, that you're going to fail, therefore you should be ashamed. So it's very old, it's ingrained. And Mao, he taught everything in Hilo on the island of Hawaii. We were going to depart to go to Tahiti. It rained 5 days. And I was thinking, I hope it never stops. Because if it never stops and we don't have to go, if we don't have to go, then I can't fail, but I can blame it on the weather. And Mao was like really angry at me. So we were walking back to where we were staying from the canoes along the lava rocks in Hilo. And Mao stops me and goes, Nainoa, we're going. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, he said, when the storm comes, you get up, you stand up, you put your jacket on, and you turn and face the wind, and never turn your face away from the wind. And then he said, never let anybody know you're afraid. And so I am being asked to do things that I don't know how to do. It was not just sleep, it was fear. How are you going to deal with fear? But what happened was, like miracles, when we left Hilo, it was very, very cloudy. We got underneath the canopy, because the island creates its own weather. And we got under the canopy, and the actual stars that we needed to sail by were right there. And I went to lay down to say, I need my 8 hours on the Navigators platform. And I kept trying to go to sleep, and I couldn't. And then I finally said, you're like the stupidest person on the planet. Get up. And so I got up, and then I don't know what it is, Katie. I cannot explain it because I can't do it in real life. But the documenters say that, we were up 22 hours a day and only in cat camps. And I can't explain it. And I also cannot explain when you get into the island you seek, you're in much better health. You're stronger. all your connective tissues have been working on a moving canoe, and you're much more healthy when you get in before you leave. But the thing that was most interesting that I always remembered, it was like that night when I looked up at the stars, lying down, my head on a place that I didn't want to be, and I had this image of this door that I've always kind of vaguely imagined, that behind the door is fear. So you can lock that door up. You don't ever have to face fear. But on the voyaging canoe with Mao, you couldn't. The door had to be opened. And so what I understood, once the door was open and you were forced into the door of fear, I found that I'm not a courageous person. But what I've learned to do is that fear becomes your best friend. And with fear, I hold it really close to me, always, especially at sea. And because it's a dangerous place, and fear is my reminder about your responsibility, about staying safe and keeping everybody else safe. So fear is almost like your standard in your bar. So I never become courageous. I just become a friend to what I've always, for my whole life, been so afraid of, fear itself. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that all happened that first night out. Yeah.
That's a great motivator, especially when you're on a canoe in the deep.
Yeah.
A lot of people are interested in, when you brought up the phrase, and I've heard you use the phrase before, with that they pulled the island out of the sea. And specifically, people are interested in wave navigation. And so can you just say a little bit more about reading like the swells?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And it's, I'll give you that kind of make it really, really as simple as possible. And do know that the region we sail in the equatorial area, it's from like around 21 degrees north in Hawaii and down to about 18 degrees south in Tahiti. It's in the tropics. And why the navigation works over there is because you have the two biggest wind systems in the world: the northeast trade winds north of the equator and the southeast trade winds. They're always there. There's a big systems. And whether your localized wind is in that system, it doesn't matter. The wave, because these systems, like they call it the fetch, the length of area that the wind blows over, and so it's fetch, it's the distance that the area blows, the localized wave. That's one wave. And so it's the length of the area, and it's the speed of the wind that will tell you how big that wave will become. And it's also time. How long has it been blowing in that consistent wind speed and consistent direction? It builds these big, what we call wave trains. They're coming across the Pacific. They're always there. The easterly wave is always there. This is crucial because, if you take the system up to a place like outside of Seattle or British Columbia, the winds are changing so much. The system is moving so quick, and the variability of direction and the variability of wind speed and direction and fetch. Up there, when we go up into the higher latitudes, it is really, really very difficult for us to read the ocean. Mm-hmm. On the tropics, the reason why it's relatively much easier, because these wave trains, no matter what the wind is blowing on the canoe at the moment, those waves are always there. The trick is to be able to recognize those big wave trains from the other waves. So the system of using waves is, at least in my humble opinion, is designed because it's in the tropics and it's governed by these big wind systems. Those are localized winds. So it's the localized winds that are driving those wave trains where you are. But it's not easy, because if you have in your area where you are experiencing the wind, if the wind is not coming from that easterly direction, the big wave trains are still there. But let's say the winds are now coming from the north. Mm-hmm. It's going to build, and it takes time to build a wave, but that wave gets on top of that east wave. And then in those times, it's really hard. That's where it takes years and years to be able to almost look into the water to to read the big easterly wave train. That's what you're looking for. And it's a discipline, and it's And in the end, the wave navigation is the most important, but it's the hardest, because sometimes it's not just what you see or even what you feel, but do you have the confidence in your training that you're being able to read one wave from the other? Mm-hmm. And so the wave navigation constantly requires you to constantly watching, because the stars are the easiest because they're always going to be there as long as it's clear skies. The sun is the easiest. The moon is the easiest. It's the wave, because the wave is always changing with the localized wind. And so for me, maybe not for all the navigators, but for me, it's when I get confused because maybe the wave trains are getting hidden by other swells. Mm-hmm. That it's the question is, are you confident you can read it? Because if you're not confident, you got to stop. If you don't know where you're going, you got to stop. But then there's also another gift on the ocean. It's the big storms that are in the higher latitudes, primarily in the winter side of the equator. So like now we're in the northern hemisphere winter. So the big swells that break on the north shore of Oahu, those are big storms, and those wave trains will travel thousands of miles. But those waves are different shape. The localized wave it's like the one wave come, another wave comes after. It's like they leapfrog, but the energy is not like. But the big wave, the big storm waves that leave the storm centers and travel thousands of miles and come to you, they are horizon to horizon. So you can distinguish those big waves. When you see the big waves coming and you know it's at a certain star house and a certain bearing, you don't have to worry about any other waves. Just read that one wave, because it's so dominant, it's so big, and storm's driving it. It's not going to move very far in 12 to 24 hours because the storm is so far away. And so once you have the big, we call them the long waves, the big storm waves, when they come in, it's like a gift that they're so recognizable that as long as you know what the bearing of the wave's coming from, that's all you got to do is update it, sunrise and sunsets. And then that it's like a star. If the big wave out of Hawaii is coming out of the north, it's like the North Star. And so if I can see that wave, I know where north is. And then you can steer the canoe. So that's kind of the general way that we do it.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. And someone has a follow-up question. Peter Gavet asks, have there been any changes in wave patterns due to climate change, and similar with wind patterns, ocean temperatures, and things like that? Or do you anticipate changes that will affect navigating with this method in the future?
Yeah, that's a really, 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 it's not just a good question, it's an important question. For me, my lifetime's so short that I don't really know how to measure any kind of real measurable objective change. And so, but I'm also saying that even because your lifetime's so short, that change may be existing, but you can't see it. I do know sea surface temperature is changing. I mean, sometimes, God darn, Hawaii is so hot. It's the water is just uncomfortably too warm. And of course, it's just obvious. I mean, our corals are dying everywhere. I mean, the where I live, where it was full of life when I was a child, now it's biologically dead. And I mean, and we do see, as much as people will deny it, our coastlines, the water's rising. I mean, and it's very distinct in the places that we were born and raised, been there all the time. And now we see where water never was, it's inside now. So it's happening. And but the question about the winds and storms, I work a lot with National Weather Service. And we have a network actually around the world that we work with, and so we discuss these issues about changes and the impact on voyaging. And one, just take one, hurricane risk. Our canoes are 3 feet off the water. They are not designed for a major hurricane. They're just not designed for the chaos of being inside the center of those storms and how its vortex is pulling the waves in. And the canoe can handle, if the waves are spread very far, they can be 40 feet high. As long as it's not the height of the wave, it's the steepness of the wave. The real danger is not wind speed. It's the shape of the wave. But inside hurricanes, the hydraulic cycle is so steep, they just pick the whole canoe up and flip it right over. And you can't, there's nothing you can do. And so we spent 46 years staying out of the storms, but the problem now is that we don't know if we can do that anymore. So National Weather Service is very conservative about suggesting measurable change because their data is relatively new. But just recently, they've been starting to talk with friends of mine where they're, like for this year, they're predicting category 6 hurricane. But there is no category 6. It's category 5, and everything above that number is going to be category 5. But the problem is the wind speed is so great now that looking at the progression from 1 to 5, so what would you define 6 to be? Or would you create a 6? And they're saying that like El Nino, when it comes to the Pacific, we're going to get category 6. The other thing is that they are also modeling category 7, which would take it to not the intercourse speeds of a tornado, but the problem with the hurricanes is so much they're 400 times wider than the dangerous areas of a tornado. These are massive storms, and so what they're saying is the trend is more storms, higher wind speeds, greater days of storm risk because they're stronger and blowing at a dangerous strength longer, and they're moving slower. So the Bahamas got hit. It was 27 hours or 24 hours where category 5 sat on them. And so for us guys now in the voyaging, planning this Moana Nui Akea voyage, we don't know how to shrink down the safe time anymore. We know it's not as, we know it's more dangerous. And so we don't have the data to make really clear decisions. So we're making conservative decisions. So we're shrinking the sailing time in the equator, in the equatorial area, just so that we don't get caught, because we are having storms. We're having tropical cyclones in the Eastern Pacific in the months of April, which essentially didn't exist.
Right.
And so we do know that basically it's the Earth that is dealing with us creating more heat and putting through carbon. And so the Earth is responding to it because hurricanes are a system to lift the warm, hot air off the equatorial region, send it north with upper level winds, and descend in the cold air. It's this beautiful refrigeration system on the Earth that allows us to live most anywhere on the planet. But what we're doing is when we increase the heat, you're forcing those systems to lift more air, hence more storms. So I'm not an expert, but I do poke around and ask questions because we're trying to figure out when is a safe season to sail anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's scary. Yeah.
No, it's a massive challenge. And this is a good kind of a micro example, just one canoe, but it's a canoe people really care about following. But it's a great example of the wider issues that are affecting the whole ocean and the whole world, because the hurricane season is much longer in the Atlantic as well. How many navigators has Polynesian Voyaging Society trained now?
Excuse me. God, I don't know. I would do it through generations. I mean, in my generation time, Mao invited a group of 10 to his island, and for the first time in their history of their islands, he would put them through the ceremony called Po. And Po is a graduation by your teacher, and it signals that. Mom was so funny. He said, "Yeah, we give Po, but we let you go to the ocean to learn. It doesn't mean you know anything." So when you ask the question, I laugh because in one hand, Polynesian Voyaging Society trained no navigators. It depends on what level. And on the other hand, if we consider and assume the reality and the truth that we are just students of the great navigators and students of the earth, and accept the fact that you're going to be a student forever and enjoy the journey of learning. So if you look at it from that perspective as students of Mao, then you have, from the senior level, you have 10 highly qualified navigators sail far in Mao. If you go down to the next generation, that would be around the 50s at level, there's probably, again, as students, you have probably, I don't know, it's a good question, probably another 10. But when you come down to the Worldwide Voyage group, that we needed 400 crew members, and we had this massive time to be able to sail. And do know on the Worldwide Voyage, I'm guessing 50% of the time we navigated by learning the old way, but 50% of the time we used. You don't try to navigate by the stars to the Great Barrier Reef or to Nova Scotia coastlines or to the coast of South Africa. I mean, we were watching the GPS every 2 minutes. So for safety reasons, I mean, there was half the time we were using the best instrumentations. We were radioing the top meteorologists in the world. So as they say, but it's in the cold and the deep, big, broad oceans like the Pacific and even the Atlantic where you can exercise the learning and exercise, because you're not going to hit anything. You're not going to be in crazy currents. You're not going to be in rogue waves. You're not going to be in a hurricane. But because of that, we have a really strong young pool that came out of the Worldwide Voyage that are now in their 30s. Then we have this another pool that I think, don't tell anybody, but I think, God darn, I don't know what it is, but they're just brilliant. Oh my God. I mean, who's teaching who? And even this presentation I did, it took me forever to get the slides to work, and then you got to move it around, and then I had to go send it to you. I had to get 3 guys to come help me send it to you guys. I couldn't even do it myself. And so I'm not good at much of anything, but they are brilliant. And what they know is this group during COVID, we had to shut down. We don't recruit. Mm-hmm. What we do is we get advice from school teachers. Send us your best student. And so, but we say to the school teacher, you send your student, you come, you take care of them. You know, you take care of them in the process. And so we're training the teacher and the student at the same time. But this class is different. It almost, in a very deep way, figured out that what nobody has is time. So mm-hmm. Why would you commit to something extraordinarily time intensive like navigation? Mm-hmm. And in some ways, I think they're just trying to, like you guys do maps. They're just trying. They want to be cartographers of their lives. They want to map their future, and they know the storms are here, and they know that they have to deal with it because our generation's not, and they know they need to take responsibility for themselves. And somehow, when they come to Hokulea, it means something to them. Where on that journey they're going to fit. Maybe navigation will be a way to help them to find their way into an uncertain and insecure, fractured future, what it looks like today. And so they are committed in a different way. They're not just learning how to tie the bowl in or know what the seabird does. They're really looking at something much greater than that. And that's why I want to raise the bar on the testing really, really high, because these young ones know that for them to be ready for the storm, they got to be challenged. And what they don't know is I know they can do it if they train. And so it's like stepping stones, right? It's like stepping stones to allow them to map their future. So in this group now, we had 66, but COVID kind of shut that all down. Mm-hmm. So we have like 66 different categories, but if I were to look at the ones who are really going to be good, I would say right now, just with this group, you probably got another 10 that are going to be really good. Yeah.
Excellent. That's actually a great note to stop on with some hope for the future. So we want to thank you one more time, an absolute round of applause. We're so honored that you could speak with us today. We've had such wonderful reaction in the chat. We didn't get to all the questions, unsurprisingly, but if people want to know more, I've just put a link to the resources page from hokulea.com, which is the Polynesian Voyaging Society's website. Do check out the society. They obviously are doing wonderful, wonderful work. You can follow along with the Worldwide Voyage. They have classroom resources up on the website. It's a really good resource in and of itself. And that's how you can learn more about the canoe and about the story and everything there. So I need to turn things back over to Salim here, but we are so, so grateful, Nainoa. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm honored. Thank you, folks, for making this happen.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Nainoa, for this amazing talk, to hear about the extraordinary work that you do, your organization, and everyone who supports it. It seems to me like it takes the world to make this happen, but you have to create the world. So it can happen, right? So again, my thanks to you on behalf of all of us here at the Ruderman Conference team and Stanford Libraries. I hope to have the great honor of meeting you in person, but of course we will. This is what we could get, and we're so grateful and privileged for that. I want to once again thank Barry Lawrence Ruderman for being the chief sponsor of this event, and also to the Native American Cultural Center and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office at the School of the Earth, Energy, and Environmental Sciences for their support and their co-sponsorship. And with that, we will end today's session. Take care, everybody, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.